The sun beat down on the cobblestones of the metropolitan city square, a place where time was measured in the frantic pace of professional lives and the cold indifference of the crowd. In the center of this swirling human current sat Elena, a woman who had become part of the urban landscape. To the thousands of commuters rushing past, she was a ghost in tattered rags, a shadow they expertly avoided with a practiced dip of the shoulder or a sudden fascination with their phones. Mothers tightened their grip on their children's hands, pulling them away as if her poverty were a contagious disease, while businessmen looked right through her, their eyes focused on a future that she no longer inhabited. Yet beneath the layers of dirt and the oversized, moth-eaten coat, Elena's eyes remained a startling, piercing blue. They held a deep, ancient intelligence, the kind born from years of observing the silent languages of nature. Before the cold concrete of the streets became her only bed, she was Dr. Elena Vance, a world-renowned primatologist whose groundbreaking work had redefined our understanding of the great apes. But life had a cruel way of stripping away titles and dignity. A personal tragedy that claimed her family had left her hollowed out, and a subsequent corrupt corporate takeover of her beloved sanctuary had stolen her professional life and her purpose. Now, she simply existed on the fringes of a society that had no use for her expertise, a forgotten relic of a life she could no longer touch. The mundane rhythms of the city were suddenly pierced by a sound that did not belong in a world of concrete and glass. It began as a distant rumble, followed by the frantic wail of sirens and, most chillingly, the sound of blood-curdling screams echoing from the direction of the nearby Metropolitan Zoo. The air in the square grew heavy, with a collective realization that something had gone terribly wrong. The casual indifference of the crowd vanished in an instant, replaced by a primal, electric fear that rippled through the streets like a physical wave. People stopped in their tracks, their faces turning pale as the sounds of destruction grew louder. Then he appeared, crashing through a line of ornamental hedges. Titan, a massive 400-pound silverback gorilla, erupted into the square. He was also a creature in deep agony. Blood matted the hair on his broad shoulder, and his eyes scanned the urban labyrinth with a terrifying mix of confusion and raw rage. He roared, a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the very windows of the surrounding skyscrapers, lashing out at a parked car and denting the heavy metal. He was a king without a throne. Total chaos ensued. People tripped over their own feet in a desperate, screaming scramble for safety. Within seconds, police cruisers skidded to a halt as they formed a jagged perimeter around the square. Officers spilled out, their faces pale and sweating behind the sights of their drawn weapons. The police commander, a man whose hands trembled slightly despite his years of tactical training, shouted orders through a megaphone, preparing to use lethal force to stop what the media would later call the beast of the city square. Titan, cornered and increasingly desperate, swung toward a group of trapped tourists cowering near Elena's bench. He beat his massive chest, a thundering percussion of defiance and pain, and let out a roar of pure, unadulterated suffering. While everyone else fled for their lives, the invisible woman did the unthinkable. Elena stood up. With a calm that defied the madness surrounding her, she began walking directly toward the towering silverback. The police commander, seeing a civilian in the line of fire, raised his hand to give the final order. "Fire on my mark," he screamed. But just as his finger tightened on the trigger, Elena raised her own hand and spoke a single, low-frequency word that seemed to resonate in the very bones of the gorilla, freezing him mid-charge in a moment of impossible silence. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. The air in the square turned to lead as the police commander's hand remained suspended, his finger hesitating on the trigger of his rifle. Behind the barricades, a sea of screens flickered, recording a scene that defied every law of urban survival. There was no noise now, no sirens, no shouting, only the heavy breathing of a creature that could kill a man with a single swipe of its hand. The world watched as the woman in rags stood away from the predator, a tiny figure of flesh against a mountain of muscle. In that moment, the years of grime seemed to fall away from Eleanor's face. She wasn't looking at a monster, she was looking at a memory. 10 years ago, Titan had been an infant, clinging to her neck in an enclosure. She had been Dr. Eleanor Vance then, a woman who spoke the language of the forest. When a personal tragedy claimed her family, Titan became her reason to wake up. They had shared a vocabulary of touch that bypassed the barriers of species. But a corrupt corporate machine eventually swallowed her sanctuary, having no room for such bonds. They had dragged her out for resisting their profit-driven rebranding, and she had watched through a window as Titan was crated like cargo for the Metropolitan Zoo, his screams of abandonment echoing in her soul until the day she hit the streets. Titan's nostrils flared, drawing in her scent. Beneath the smell of the city, he found the familiar musk of the only human who had ever truly loved him. His massive body began to relax, the tension draining out of his shoulders. He let out a whimper, a sound so vulnerable it seemed impossible coming from such a powerful beast. Elena did not flinch. She used the same hand signals she had taught him a decade ago, a circular motion followed by a tap to her own chest. It was a silent message. I am here. You are safe now. Disregarding the snipers, Elena reached out. Her hand was small and wrinkled, but her touch was as light as a feather when she placed it against Titan's scarred cheek. The crowd gasped as the 400-pound gorilla did something miraculous. He closed his eyes and lowered his head into her lap, leaning into her touch with total submission. For a few heartbeats, the city square was no longer a battlefield. It was a sanctuary restored, a moment of pure grace amidst the cold concrete. But the peace was shattered by the very fear that had created the chaos. A nervous young officer, his face pale as he gripped his sidearm, felt the weight of the screaming crowd pressing in. The adrenaline pushed him past his breaking point. In a moment of pure panic, he squeezed the trigger, discharging a warning shot into the sky. The bang was deafening, a sharp crack that tore through the silence like a thunderbolt. The sound triggered every instinct of betrayal in Titan's mind. To him, the noise was the crack of a whip. He roared, his eyes turning bloodshot as the peace evaporated. He lunged, not at Eleanor, but toward the source of the noise, the young officer who stood frozen. Titan was a blur of black fur and fury, preparing to crush the man who had dared to break the truce. Elena did not hesitate. She threw her frail body directly into the path of the charging silverback, placing herself between the police and the animal. She spread her arms wide, shielding the officer with her own life. As the red lasers of the sniper's sights danced across her back and the hiss of tranquilizer darts began to fill the air, Elena looked into the lens of a news crew's camera. Her voice was clear, ringing out. "He is not the animal here," she cried. "He is a victim of your corporate greed, and I will not let you kill him twice." Just as she spoke, the first dart struck Titan's shoulder. The world held its breath as the heavy, drug-tipped darts found their mark in Titan's shoulder. The giant silverback didn't roar this time. Instead, he looked at Elena with eyes that were slowly clouding over, seeking one last moment of reassurance in a world that had offered him nothing but cold steel. As his massive legs gave way, he didn't collapse into a heap of aggression. He sank slowly to the pavement, his fingers twitching as they caught the hem of Elena's tattered, grime-stained coat. He held onto her as a child would a mother's hand in the dark. Elena remained by his side until the last second, her own hand resting on his massive chest, feeling the rhythmic slowing thump of a heart broken by more than just a tranquilizer. Even as the heavy tactical teams rushed forward with their black shields and heavy nets, pinning Elena's arms behind her back, she never took her eyes off him. She was hauled away in the back of a cold police cruiser, yet she looked not like a criminal caught in a net, but like a guardian who had finally completed her most sacred mission. The footage of the homeless angel and the fugitive king exploded across every digital platform. The city, which had spent years walking past Dr. Elena Vance as if she were discarded trash, suddenly couldn't look away. The narrative shifted with the speed of a wildfire. Journalists began digging, peeling back the layers of the woman they had collectively erased from their reality. By the next morning, the name Dr. Elena Vance was no longer a ghost. It was a headline. Investigative reporters uncovered the dark, rotting corridors of the Metropolitan Zoo's management, revealing the illegal trafficking that had brought Titan into their care. They found the dusty records of the heartless, corrupt corporate takeover that had destroyed Elena's career a decade ago. The public, fueled by collective guilt and righteous anger, gathered in the thousands outside the precinct. They carried signs not just for her release, but for the safety and the long-denied dignity of the silverback they had nearly seen slaughtered in the middle of their very city streets. Amidst the global outcry, a wealthy benefactor who had once admired Elena's pioneering work emerged from the shadows. Seeing the footage of the woman protecting the beast with her own frail body, he purchased the rights to the old sanctuary, the very place where Elena and Titan's journey had begun. He cleared her legal fees, wiped away her undeserved record, and offered her the one thing she thought she had lost forever: a purpose. Months later, the grey concrete of the city was a distant memory. In the heart of a lush, emerald-green habitat, Dr. Elena Vance no longer wore rags. She stood tall in a white lab coat, her face restored by the peace of being seen. Beside her walked Titan, the once terrified beast, now a peaceful king in his own right. They moved through the trees in a synchronized rhythm that spoke of a bond deeper than language. The world often mistakes silence for weakness and brokenness for a lack of value. We walk past the monsters and the beggars every day, never realizing that the healing of one often depends entirely on the recognition of the other. Society had ignored the broken woman, never imagining that she was the only one capable of calming the storm created by our own neglect. As the sun dipped gracefully below the golden horizon of the sanctuary, casting long shadows across the wild grass, Elena reached out, her hand finding Titan's leathery palm. It was a joining of two worlds, a symbol of a promise kept. Poverty could not break them, and steel bars could not keep them apart. Every single face we ignore on the street carries a hidden universe within it, a complex story of tragedy and triumph, waiting for someone to stop, look, and finally see the soul beneath the surface.